Howdy, we're going to take a look at When Helping Hurts. Now, note that this is a controversial topic. Corbett and Fickert wrote a book called When Helping Hurts to suggest to Americans that they, or people from developed nations, wealthier nations, that they think twice before giving money to the developing world. So basically they were telling the wealthiest nations that even the small amount of money that they were giving was probably too much. And that can be a very controversial idea, of course, because what it can do is let people off the hook, people who already didn't want to give to the poor or to the needs of the world. Now they're being told, oh, you know what you're doing is bad. It's not helping the people. And so it kind of gives them an excuse for not even giving a small amount to help. Yet the concerns of Corbett and Fickert are legitimate. And so we'll get into that. For instance, when you give once, people appreciate. When you give twice, you start giving anticipation. 3 times, you create an expectation. Oh, that's the role of Western nations. They're the patron and we're the clients. They should take care of us. By the 4th time, it becomes entitlement. We deserve this. You caused us to be poor in the first place. And then by the 5th time, you've established dependency. Now notice that just because some author, like the author of Toxic Charity, said this, doesn't mean it's true. This is kind of some sort of aphorism or wisdom, but it's not based on empirical research. He hasn't told us, what does he mean by give once, give twice? Is it really that neat and tidy? In real life, different people in different countries have different responses to different amounts of help. So it's actually much more complicated than the author of this popular book, Toxic Charity, admits. Okay, just to think of how Americans typically approach helping. There was a tsunami that killed over 200,000 people in Indonesia, wiped out many businesses. What should Westerners' responses be to such a situation? How do they make the most of it? Their church wants to help. They don't want to just ignore the suffering. They want to get involved. Do they send money? Do they go over and spend 2 weeks at the crisis point? But what experience do they have in dealing with tsunamis and burying bodies and pulling people out of wreckage? Are they the right people for that? Is it really their role just to send money and to pray? So you have to think through really how can you get involved? What do you do to prepare for such a trip? How long will you be there? What training do you need? This happens every year. There's some sort of crisis. Hurricane Katrina in the south in the U.S. Are people from the rest of the other states in churches the right people to be rebuilding homes? Do we just send nurses? Do we just send construction crews? What resources do we bring? Who goes with us on the trip? Do people at that point need Bibles? Do they need preaching? Do they just need hospitals? Do they just need clean water? And so what does ministry look like in a crisis like that? And the authors of When Helping Hurts, Corbett and Fickert, see 3 different levels. The first is relief. The first week or month after such a tsunami, people need relief. That's the time to send money. That's the time to send the doctors. That's the time to, to clean up the mess. And then the second is rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is, okay, let's get your businesses back up and running. Let's get you back into homes. Let's get your health restored. And then development is, how do we make sure that the next time a tsunami hits you, that your villages are not wiped out? And so that's kind of the longer term planning. And the question is, where does the church fit? Is the church mostly about relief? Is it mostly about rehabilitation or development? And probably different people have different skills and callings. Some are the ones who just want to get on the next plane and go help with the Ebola outbreak. They just want to provide relief. They're not thinking long term. They're not thinking about training others. They're not thinking about more just laws. They're not thinking about changing the situation. They're thinking about just helping the person in need, giving the cold water to the person. Whereas others are more about development. Rather than giving the man a fish, it's about teaching the man to fish, for instance. So the point about relief, the most immediate, the church gets on a plane and goes to the next Ebola outbreak or the next hurricane or tsunami or earthquake riddled country, is that relief is supposed to be seldom temporary and immediate. we shouldn't be providing relief 3, 4, 5 years afterwards. Just sending money, just bringing clean water to people who have suffered from a hurricane or a tsunami or something, because that's no longer relief. That's dependency. That's just paternalism, or I'm your patron and you're my client and I'm giving to you. It's a handout, but it's not relief. Whereas, yes, within the first week or month after such a situation, people do need the relief. So seldom, if it's seldom temporary and immediate, it fits the definition of relief. Whereas if it's longer than that, it's a handout or it's dependency. And so Corbett and Fickert's concern is that if you see people in developing nations or in poor situations as primarily those lacking material resources, in other words, you have a material definition of poverty. And that's in contrast to other definitions we've looked at in the class, like those from a transformational development see poverty as many broken relationship with the land, with God, with others, with the government. But a material definition says that, well, people just need more money. And you have a savior complex. You love to be the shining star who arrives, to help people out. And if there's already demoralization among the poor, people believing they can't solve their own problems, that they're meant to be poor, that they should be recipients of aid, and rather than seeing themselves as those who flourish, as those who can change their laws, as those who can improve their situations, then we end up with helping that hurts. So this is the equation in Corbett and Fickert for helping that hurts. And so what they suggest is we change each one of these boxes. We don't just have a material definition of poverty. We have a holistic view. That we not have savior complexes. Instead, how can we be partners rather than saviors? That we try to change the situation of demoralization into one of hope. Hope seems to be an important key in transformational development. If we change those top three boxes, we will not have helping that hurts. We'll have helping that develops, helping that flourishes. So the truth is that different people have different sweet spots within that. Some are best at relief, some are best at development, some are best at rehabilitation. And I think it's just important for us to be honest with ourselves about where we fit into that. Okay, notice that the green represents the top recipient of international aid from the U.S., which was Iraq, when the data was collected. And the other red dots are those who receive about 1% of that amount of money from the U.S. In other words, where are the other places that the U.S. is sending foreign direct aid? So this is essentially handouts. It's relief. It's money that we send. And is it helping that hurts? Is it actually rehabilitation? Is it development? But basically, it's this paternalistic savior complex of we're going to help you. Or you can see it in very positive terms instead of calling it a savior complex. It's justice, it's equity, it's involvement, it's partnership. So you could spin it in one direction or the other. But you can see that a lot of our aid goes to China, goes to Vietnam, North India, to Afghanistan, to Western Africa, as you can see, including a lot to Nigeria, Ethiopia, Sudan, other parts of Africa, certain parts in Central America and South America. So what we would typically term least developed nations, but it's interesting to see many least developed nations not even receiving 1% of that. Other parts of Africa or North Africa, other parts of the Middle East not receiving that sort of aid. Now the question is, why does the U.S. do this? Why does Australia send aid? Why does New Zealand send aid? Well, a pessimistic view would be it's not just helping, it's not just partnership, that it's actually to receive votes at the United Nations that are in line with the U.S. agenda. And so basically it's money with strings attached. We give you money, you vote like we want you to vote. But it's actually a very complicated picture. We give $39 billion to Iraq, and about 20 to 30% of the time they vote the way we want them to. Well, notice that there are other nations like Bangladesh, where we give $1 billion instead of $30 billion, so 40 times less money, and they vote about the same amount, 20 to 30% the way we want them to. So did the extra $38 billion that we gave to Iraq buy us any more votes. Notice that we give Israel $2 billion and they vote like we want them to around 90 to 100% of the time. And so would they continue to do that with no money? So the question, yes, we have strings attached, but does our aid actually buy votes? And it seems to not necessarily be effective at doing that. Of course, you don't know. What if we took away the $40 billion from Iraq? Would they vote even less often? But I just want to point out that scholars have considered that the money tends to be tied to politics, and that the U.S. is not the only nation doing this. China has a similar tactic of sending foreign aid as long as you vote the way we want you to. And in fact, China even more directly ties its foreign aid to the way that other nations vote. So just a pessimistic view of how helping hurts. Foreign aid, the definition of that is when you take money from the poor in a rich country and give it to the rich people in a poor country. And let me just go through that again. It's taxing people in the rich nations, typically the poorest people in rich nations. The lowest economic earners in rich nations are the ones who feel taxation the most. And the tax money then goes to where in the foreign nations when we give foreign aid? It goes to the politicians, it goes to the wealthy. And so it's taking money from the poor in rich nations and giving it to the rich in the poor nations. That's partially true. That's the reason why sometimes we try to avoid the government in this process at all. Avoid using government money from Western nations and instead use churches, use non-government organizations, mission agencies. And then when it goes to the receiving countries on the other end, don't use the government either. Instead, go directly to churches, to communities, to those who know how to use the money the most. Here's an example of paternalism, dependency, demoralization, countries where they rely heavily on foreign aid. And that means if year after year after year, Guinea-Bissau is receiving 200% more money from foreign nations than it generates on its own. Democratic Republic of Congo receives more money from outside nations, 126% of its own economic growth. 1.2 times that comes from outside. But virtually every country in Africa relies on foreign aid as part of its economic engine. Madagascar receives 2 times as much money from outside of its nation, and Rwanda as well, almost 2 times as much money outside of its nation than it generates from within. Same with Central Africa Republic. Some of these nations like Uganda receive as much money from outside as they do generate on their own. So if this happens in 1 year as relief, it makes sense. But if it happens year after year after year, you wonder, are we rehabilitating? Are we developing? Or are we just creating a paternalistic expectation, anticipation relationship? You can see Liberia as the number one crisis here, receiving 700%, almost 800% more from outside than from inside. Now, all that to say about helping that hurts or giving directly, there are non-government agencies which say, this is correct, this is equity, this is taking money from some of the wealthiest nations, the United States, other wealthy nations, and giving it to the people who need it most. And there have been a number of empirical studies that show if you just take money from, not take, but if Americans freely offer money in the form of aid to women entrepreneurs in Uganda, they will spend it how they know. You eliminate the middleman, get rid of the government process, get rid of the non-government agencies, the Westerners who are involved in those agencies, send the money directly to them, don't tell them how to spend it, don't provide oversight, that they will use it on school fees, they'll use it on food, they'll use it on entrepreneurial activities. And so the poor know best how to use their own money. And so that's another philosophy about aid. Is that helping that hurts? Is that dependency? Or is that equity? Is that justice? Is that giving cold water to our neighbor when they need it?